So the next part of the modeling presentation is a little informal, and last summer I began working on a number of locomotives for all the other things that I think I've done. By the way, I'm Mel Houck, for anybody that hasn't seen the website or met me before. Primarily, I guess, an engine builder, a locomotive builder. I brought a bunch of locomotives to display today. Some of them are out already, but these were the Camelbacks, and the O&W was a large user of all types of Camelback locomotives. They were originally designed to make use of the lower heat value per pound per hour of anthracite coal. So they had wide wooden fireboxes. You can see in this one, this is number 55. They had 5 of these Class L switchers. They were all very well maintained. There was one that was assigned at least to Oswego, one to Sydney, one to Norwich, one to Middletown yards customarily, and I think there was one that was did quite a bit of duty up in Fulton. But they were interesting. They were built by the Cook Locomotive Works. They were originally delivered with slide valve cylinders. They were saturated steam, and this is a picture of the number 55 at the water plug near Wisner Avenue in Middletown. I would just sort of like this photograph because it actually shows the operation of the Sheffield water crane. All of the water facilities for O&W steam engines were basically cisterns, and there was only one or two, Paradise, and there was one other at Sydney that had the spout directly on the tank. So this is the prototype, and I looked at it, and some years ago in Mainline Modeler there was an article where a chap had taken a boiler from a nickel plate products class U260 and had grafted it onto an 060 frame. I had an old non-operating Class U nickel plate products. They were dreadful engines to begin with, but I picked up a junker at a show for 20 or 30 bucks years ago and had always intended for it to become one of these. Next one. And here's the workbench, and one of the things that has to be done, this is a sort of a dry layup. The fireman's shelter has to be made, and one of the things that Nickel Plate had compromised when they built these models is they used open frame motors, and because they didn't have a cab at the end of the locomotive for the large motor magnet to stick up inside, they raised the entire superstructure so that to create some kind of a credible model locomotive, the whole thing has to be cut down. And what's done is, you can see here's the side view just kind of laid up, and I took the cab and removed it from the boiler altogether and cut some slots in the boiler so that I could just grip it and pull it upwards to get it at the proper height so that it wasn't quite so squat looking. Next one, Dougie. And there's another view, and just fitting up with the tender. And there's a comparison of one of the original nickel plate Class U locomotives right out of the box. More about that a little later, but that's just a comparison, and I'm just trying to match and make sure that the heights were approximately the same. And there is the locomotive in its finished array, and you can see that the cab has been moved upwards and soldered in place. A couple of sheets right here you can see that one of the features of pulling the cab upward is that there's a sort of a crescent-shaped slot that has to be filled. So after having done a number of these over the years, I developed a technique where I would glue some shimbrass to a thin piece of plywood or a piece of styrene. And it turns out the diameter of these happens to be 13/16 of an inch, and that gizmo on the left is an old-fashioned greenleaf punch. Anybody that ever was into radio construction, electronic work in the tube era, the power tube era, those are the greenleaf punches. But it's making a nice clean hole in a piece of sheet metal so to prevent distortion of this very thin sheet metal, glue it to some cardboard, and that red rectangle is actually a section of the 13/16 diameter hole, and it covers down right over the that last gap in the cab. We soldered in place, and that's how I finished them off. All right, that's another one of the 060 pictures, another one of the Class L's, and that's right in its later years. Not all of them were repainted and renumbered. They were all found by the bankruptcy survey that was made in April of 1937, all to be very well maintained and in good condition, and it was recommended by the equipment surveyor that they be preserved and kept in service. So this is one of the last pictures of it in meaningful service. The Class U locomotives were all delivered again from the Houck Locomotive Works. There were 16 locomotives that were delivered as 260s, and they were immediately and fairly diligently shopped to add superheated steam capacity to change the steam chest. And on 8 of them, they added a 4-foot section to the boiler. They rebuilt some of the frame sections, and they became 10-wheelers. This is number 256. This is one of the locomotives that was rebuilt in that fashion. And here's one of the original configurations after it's been converted to superheated steam with the installation of one of the original Baker valve gear arrays. You can notice that it has only one air pump, and it's still operating a carbide, non-electrified headlamp. This is number 281. This is a Class B 260. These had 63-inch drivers as opposed to the Class U, which the locomotive company equipped with 69-inch drivers. They were reputed to be, all of them reputed to be very easy riding engines, probably a feature of the larger driver diameter. The Class B engines, and there were 12 of these, riding on the smaller size drivers, were often interestingly double-headed with the larger driver locomotives, and it was just a matter of matching them with throttle speed. They were all considered to be very economical and useful engines on the O&W. There's one of the projects. These slides are just were done a little haphazardly, but that's on my workbench. That's actually what's done to raise up the cab, which it needs to be raised up and rebuilding both the Class U1 and the Class L 060. The next one shows it, and that's what happens. I push it all up and push those little ears on the front and rear of the cab into the slots. And that's the gap that has to be filled and covered by the plate on the other side. Very interestingly, if you look very carefully at the pictures of the O&W engines, very much the same thing was done. These things were shopped and reshopped, that they would take the cabs on and off. If you look at the number of them, have this very flat rectangular plate with a couple of bolts in it to fill in the front and the rear ground sheet. Front and rear cab sheets is attached to the boiler next to the. Here's one of the little Class B 260s that's under construction. That was also using a nickel plate frame. That one had the cab already lifted up and a number of the fittings installed. Those are 63-inch drivers and kept with the layered crossheads. And if anybody had noticed on the website, I put up an article about camelback piping. There's some peculiarities of it. And this is the bottom view. As you can see, the piping, some of it's cut off, but both injectors were on the engineer's side of the locomotive, so that.
Speak into the mic. We can't hear you.
both of the injectors were on the fireman's side of the locomotives, and due to the fact that the fireman and the engineer were separated operationally. Next one, and there is a picture of the engineer's side of one of these locomotives. You can see there's a Nathan lifting injector to the rear of the cab, and a Nathan lifting injector to the front of the cab. The way those were fed, as you can see, the right-hand side tender feed pipe connects to the rear injector. That forces the feed water through a tube over the top of the boiler, through the cab on the other side, and into the injector on the left side of the boiler. The left side feed crosses underneath the boiler and comes up underneath and feeds this injector in the front. So that's, it took a little decoding over the years and a little picture matching, but finally had gotten it straightened out. Interestingly, on all these locomotives, and never quite understood for years until I found some pictures, the center cab window could be removed completely or it could be slid forward. The front cab window was fixed. It was never up and down, and I never quite understood what happened to the rear window, how they could open them, but they slid down, and there is one that's, when I rebuilt it, I cut the window sections apart and left it as partially open. On the right of the view is that mechanism that's already been sorted out to be the Class B 260 mechanism. Next one there. Back to the front there is the 060, and you can see the front of the locomotive, and that's just to show the cab in that picture. And that's right. Here's here's a picture of the Class U1 up at the original station in Walton before that elegant brick and stucco station was built. And that's one of the Class U engines as it was delivered, number 250, with the big pilot, big wooden pilot, and the outside emission slide valve cylinders. And you can see the very elaborate decor. They put a star in the front and the old original oil headlamp, not even a carbide light. As 255, this is another one of the Class U. This is one of the ones that was not rebuilt, but it appears in a number of photographs with an original pilot and a footboard pilot. One of the models that I built that's on display over on the display table is number 255 with the footboard pilot. And there's 255 prior to that rebuilding. Check dates on photos. I can't really tell when it was done, but it's at the end. So that's the end of this presentation. Just